Hi, we'll be discussing now additional information about health and safety management system, which can help management to manage health and safety elements in a better way. One of the important concepts to keep in mind is the perception. Perception is defined as the process of assembling information from the sense organs into usable mental information or understanding of the word. That's what we mean of perception. So, in a way, when I see a statement written somewhere, the way I read it using my eyes, processing it in my brain could be completely or slightly different from somebody else standing just next to me. What factors make different people understand or receive the message in different ways? Well, there are so many factors. Actually, it depends on the person's background, how effective their senses are, where we talk about the visual or sense of hearing or touching something. Also, their previous experience, life experience, their genes, how quickly they can analyze the information and understand them. All these factors could play a role on how different people receive the message differently. We need to keep in mind as management, when we give a message, thinking that it will be understood in a certain way, it might not be the fact actually. Taking into account different groups of people we have, different mentalities, different group ages, genders, so on and so forth. How can we as a management or health and safety professionals improve perception of hazard, particularly of our workforce? Of course, this could be done through different mechanisms, starting with alarms. Using alarms will help the people notice hazards and avoid them or do the needful action. Having signs in different areas in the workplace will always be a reminder to the place about safety-related matters, such as safety exits, danger zones, requirement for using particular PPE in certain areas. All these are signs and reminders. We don't only mean here our workforce, but we also mean our visitors and contractors or anybody who happen to be in the workplace in certain times, such as cleaners or maintenance workers. Always constantly providing information, instruction, training and supervision to make sure we remind our workforce and people who happen to be within a workplace about safety priorities, hazards, risks, available controls to protect the people, as well as emergency situation. We'll have a short question here just for us to think about what we all discussed previously. In this question, you are required to give 5 examples in which employees' perception of hazard in the workplace might be improved. You may spend 5 minutes outlining these methods. How can we improve human behavior, improve their perception towards health and safety related matters? Of course, through good communication. When we say good communication, we mean using the right language, Arabic, English, Hindi, French, for example, which is suitable to the workforce. We might, in many cases, find ourselves required to use multiple versions of our safety-related messages. Use the right level of technicality in these safety terms or safety messages. They shouldn't be very complicated for laborers, for example, bearing in mind the background of these people and their level of education. Using as much as possible symbols and pictures, but they should be clear enough in order to send safety-related messages. Of course, we need to conduct a training for technical people on how to identify hazard and spot them. We need always to remember sending or giving safety message, which could be understood very well at certain time, will not be the same in a month's time or 2 or even after a year. Usually safety and accidents related messages or emergency situation related training need to be refreshed because people don't come across these situations that often and they will be forgotten, such as the first aid, fire drills. We need to remind them. Also, we can do this on a weekly basis or a daily basis as required through the toolbox talks. We need to give special attention for vulnerable people, such as young employees, people with disability, people under training. They need to be monitored, supervised, mentored, and we use buddy system as much as possible, so having them doing the job with somebody who is more experienced. We need to have a clear and noticeable warning signs and reminders all over the workplace. This will be a very good tool to improve human behaviors when it comes to following health and safety procedures. And we use the say carrot and stick. So carrot is the rewards for the people who follow health and safety management systems and actually play a role in improving it, and the punishment for the people who decide or choose to break the rules, bend the rules, ignore them. This will send a very strong message to our workforce that there is no tolerance when it comes to safety. Now we will move to another important concept related to health and safety management in the workplace, and this is risk assessment, which is the heart of health and safety, really. Before we discuss risk assessment, we need to remind ourselves about a few important definitions, such as hazard. Hazard is a source of potential harm or damage or situation with potential for a harm or a damage to people or to assets. So this is the definition of hazard. We have so many different types of hazard, and in the screen you can see there are examples of some of them. In summary, I'm not going to go through all the list, you can take your time and read it, but in summary we can say there are categories of different types of hazards. So we can see the physical, chemical, biological, social. They are classified in different ways in different resources. So probably if you Google hazard checklist or hazard types, you will find different kinds of categorization in different resources. They're all right as long as they cover the different range of hazards. Risk assessment. When it comes to risk assessment, we also need to remind ourselves about what is meant by risk. We already spoke about hazard. What is risk? Risk is the combination of likelihood and consequence of a specific or specified hazardous event, such as accident or incident or near miss. So it's a combination of likelihood and consequence. The multiplication of these two numbers or values will give us the value of the risk, whether it's high, medium, or low. In your book, in page 37, you will see more details about calculating and evaluating risk and risk rating. So what is risk assessment as a definition? It's defined as a structure and systematic procedure for identifying hazards, evaluating risk, given the existing controls, and prioritizing actions in order to reduce the risk to an acceptable level. We can never bring the risk level to zero. There's always a chance for things to go wrong. What we try to do by conducting risk assessment is to analyze the situation, review the current and existing controls. Usually we have some control in place, making sure whether we actually put in place the best possible control measures for the situation we have, taking into account our resources such as money, budget, or human resources or equipment and material. The review helps us to make sure that we are doing our best to control hazards to a reasonable, acceptable level. Risk assessment, as per the law, needs to be suitable and sufficient. What do we mean by that? Of course, it needs to identify the significant risks and ignore the minor ones. So, depends on the workplace nature of hazards in the workplace. We need to identify significant risks and ignore the minor ones. Identify and prioritize the measures required to comply with the relevant legal requirement. We might not be able to comply with all the requirements by risk assessment recommendations, but we focus on the legal requirements and the high priority risks which have higher level of injuries or likelihood. It has to be appropriate to the nature of the work. I can't copy a risk assessment of a bank and use it for oil and gas company. There is no way. Each of these organizations have completely different list of hazards and challenges in the workplace. So the risks have to be relevant to the nature of tasks in this workplace. Level of details should be appropriate. It can't be very summarized when we have a very complicated and hazardous industry. What are the steps of risk assessment? Of course, we need to start with identifying the hazards, such as slips, trips, and falls. We need to identify groups of people which might be affected by each one of these hazards, such as workers or public, females, young employees, disabled. We need to evaluate the level of the risk, calculating the value of the risk, and then decide the best control measure or measures. They could be in a short term and long term, depends on the nature. And record the significant findings and review it from time to time. Why do we need to record the findings? Of course, it's important. It's a legal requirement. It helps us to use the important document for our next review. It helps the management budget for next year or next 6 months based on our findings. It is a learning experience, so we can share the important outcomes with different department heads or the people who need to be involved in it. It's part of continual improvement strategy that should be actually the concept of health and safety and quality management systems. Based on the recorded findings, we will decide how often do we need to review it, maybe after 1 month or maybe after maximum 1 year. We need to consider special groups. As I said before, young people, lone workers, nursing mothers, disabled people. These are called as population at higher risk. Of course, we might be wondering when and how often should I repeat or review my risk assessment. Usually we have a plan, and to say, for example, we conduct or review the risk assessment every 6 months or every 3 months. However, these plans might change, and we might find ourselves required to review the risk assessment in 4 weeks' time. What are the situations, the likely situation that might require us to take this action? There could be an accident happening in the workplace, change in the process, change in the machinery or materials that we are using. So this will bring with it new challenges, new types of hazards, new risk control requirements, change in staff. And when I say change in staff, I mean change in the nature of staff. So we didn't have young employees, now we have. We didn't have trainees, now we have. We didn't have any foreigner workers. Now we have people who don't speak Arabic or English, so we need to provide the documentation in the language they understand. They might need more training, so on and so forth. There might be change in legislation which require us to review our risk assessment and make sure that we are still in line with the legal requirements. And with the time passing, so maximum in a year's time, we need to review the risk assessment. Doesn't mean we have to do it all again. We need to review it to make sure it is still suitable and sufficient to our requirement. Moving to another important concept in health and safety and risk control strategy is the hierarchy of control measures, the logical order of risk control options that we need to follow when we decide about choosing the appropriate risk control for the situation we are in. Starting with elimination as a first option. If we can remove the hazards from its roots, then that's the best option. We can't, unfortunately, always do that, but the simple example about it, for example, if we have some spillage of oil on the floor, cleaning it will solve the problem from the root, as long as we don't have a constant leakage. If it was just a drop, accidental drop, or accidental spill. We don't always get the chance to eliminate the dangers, because either they are it's going to be very expensive or impossible or very inconvenient. So we often move to the second priority in the hierarchy, which is substitution. So we have, for example, a carcinogenic material that we use as part of our production, and we are able to change it by another material which can cause irritation. It is still not ideal. Irritation is something that we might be able to live with, but not cancer. We will be still looking for better controls, but substitution can solve the problem partially or reduce the level of the risk. Isolation or separation, the easiest example is about segregation or having special zones where only for staff, for example, or only for authorized people. This will isolate the danger zones from more number of people. Engineering controls such as, for example, installing ventilation system that can improve the air quality within the workplace and reduce the concentration of some substances to the acceptable level in the air. Administrative control are very important. Usually we shouldn't rely on them. They will be combination of these with the above mentioned ones, such as the substitution or isolation. There are many examples of administrative controls, such as safe systems of work, permit to work systems, reduce the exposure of time by giving more breaks or shift systems, using the signage, as I previously mentioned, as a reminder for our staff. And the last item in this list is using PPE, personal protective equipment. Usually it's the last option for a very good reason. People don't like to use them, resist using them. They will not give 100% level of protection. They are expensive on long term. They will only protect the people who are using them, but not everyone in the workplace. They have their own limitations, affect the senses, mobility, and they might actually create a risk. So if someone is using, for example, Air Defender, it will prevent them from hearing the fire alarm sometimes. So we need to make sure they're only used when they are the only available option. And we don't rely on them. We try to use them along with other control measures, such as substitution or isolation. When I want to design my health and safety management system or procedures, I will need to use different types of resources. There are some resources which are internal to the organization. They will be very important tools to enable me to make the right decisions and the right procedures. Within the company, internal organization sources of information, I can use accident records, health-related absentees, so sick leaves of my staff if they are related to their health, analyze the causes, regular inspections to areas of workplace, recording the findings, audit report outcomes, maintenance records. These are actually legal requirements. They help me to ensure the continual improvement in my workplace. However, confidentiality, especially when it comes to sick leaves, is a challenge here, so we need to make sure we have the right level of confidentiality for the personal information of our staff, even witness statements, for example. External organization to organization information, we can refer to national and international accident statistics. We can use product information, international standards, some websites of well-recognized health and safety bodies such as HSE Executive in the UK, publications, International Labour Organization, WHO. All these form important sources of information, as well as the local legislation in the country we are operating in. Moving to another important concept in health and safety management, which is safe systems of work. What factors can we take into account, or should we take into account when we develop our safe system of work? Of course, we need to remember that employers must provide safe system of work, must use a competent person to develop the system, whether they are from our workforce or they are consultant or externals. We need to consult, actually we must consult and involve our workers when we develop our system of work, safe system of work, because they are the ones who are going to use it. We must analyze the nature of the task and the environment we are operating in. It needs to be written down and not verbal, communicated very clearly with full transparency, two-way communication, and must be monitored to make sure it is working, it is valid, there are no complaints about it, there is no resistance. If there is a resistance, we need to know why is that, how can we make it work better. Lone working or lone workers are one of the challenges in some of the workplaces. They are a special group or fragile group which is at risk. Who are they, and examples about them? We need to think about situations where we have lone workers. In most of the places, most of the organizations, there will be some certain situations where they will have lone working people, such as the cleaners who come to clean after working hours, maintenance workers who might come in the weekends, people who might be required to work in the roof or basement, people who might be required to be sent out of the workplace to the customers or clients' premises, or cleaning outdoor area or maintaining outdoor area. These are just simple examples. There is a very long list of different scenarios or of people who might end up working alone without sometimes realizing that. So they might be working within the workplace, outside working hours, or in isolated areas, or they might actually be working outside the workplace, which is even more challenging. We need to identify within our workplace what situations where people are working alone, and we need to see if this is a situation for a short time or for extended periods of time, and what activities involve working alone. So the person might be actually working normally, but in some activities he will or she will be working alone, and we need to put special specification and protection measure for all of these short periods of time. Mainly focusing on security matters of these individuals as well as emergency situation preparedness. Another concept in health and safety management is permit to work, PTW, which is defined as a written procedure to ensure that work does not start until a responsible person has given the permission for that task to start. Why is it required and when? Of course, it's required when we have hazardous situation or hazardous activities, and we will be going through some examples in the next slide. First of all, let us focus on elements of permit to work. It needs to have description and assessment of the task, details of the requirements before starting, safety-related requirements before starting the task, required precautions to be taken into account before allowing the task to start, signature of authorized person, and signature when work has been completed. It needs to be implemented correctly and monitored and inspected, because unfortunately in some situations it's only a paperwork without only a paperwork and clerical thing rather than actually going and checking the scenario or the situation in the workplace before giving the permission. And there are very well-known accidents and disasters which started with not implementing permit to work system correctly or not taking it seriously. That's why it needs constant monitoring and inspection to make sure it is conducted in the right way. It needs to be done by a competent person, which might usually require training, permit to work training, and the paperwork has to be accurate, the record needs to be kept safely and accurately for inspection, for audit, for any, God forbid, future accidents. Some examples of when permit to work needs to be implemented: confined spaces, hot work activities, electrical systems, some types of mechanical maintenance, working at height, lifts, tasks in flammable environments. By default, you can see all these are very hazardous situations, and that's why permit to work is crucial in this situation. Now we want to discuss emergency procedures and what is meant by emergency situation. Emergency situations are situations which we need to be prepared and plan for it in advance within our organization. This could include situations such as fire, toxic or release of a toxic chemical or material, flooding, earthquake, high wind, and maybe terrorist attack. So wide range of possible situations. First aid assessment is really something which is different from one place to another, but there are minimum generic requirements. We need to consider when we want to know whether we have sufficient level of risk of first aid equipment and personnel within our workplace. We need to check the hazards and risk within our organization. Size of organization should be taken into account. Accident history, what nature of accidents and illnesses and injuries, particularly injuries which we had in the workplace historically. The nature and distribution of our workforce within the organization, and whether they are male, female, which language do they speak, so we can choose the right combination and numbers and location of our first aiders within the workplace. Do we have any situation where we have people working remotely or lone workers? Or if we operate in a multi-occupied site, could be a challenge, or we can turn it into opportunity to integrate the first aid system among these different occupants and come up with a strong health emergency preparedness. How far our place is from emergency services and hospitals. If we are really far working in the desert, then we need higher level of preparedness, because we are unlikely to get help quickly from the authorities. And the possibility of annual leave and other absentees of first aiders. That's why we should always have more number than what is stated legally. So if the law says we need one person for each 25 staff members and we only have 25, we should have at least two, because this person, one first aider, could be on leave or could be the casualty of an accident. So we need at least to have one or two people above the legal requirement, or maybe more. We have different recommendation and ratios for different employees based on the legal requirements of this country, nature of industry, and the location of industry. The more is the better. Here we will have a few questions. I want you to have a look at them, note them down. You need to spend maximum 10 minutes answering each one of these questions. The first question is: give examples of 3 types of work situations that may require a permit to work system, given reasons in each case for the requirements. The second question is 3 short answer questions. So the first one is about risk assessment. What are the key stages of risk assessment process? 5 minutes, 5 steps. What is required to make risk assessment suitable and sufficient? 5 minutes. And what are the circumstances that may require a risk assessment to be reviewed? I hope you enjoyed this session, and I strongly encourage you to note down your answers for the questions, because they are very good practice for the exam. Thank you very much.